Good afternoon and welcome to the final session today of the Global Family Business Summit 2023, brought to you by Family Business United. I'm your host, Paul Andrews, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Jean Santos from Hawaii, who has done some fantastic research into women and the women leaders in family businesses around the world. And we're going to talk around some of those findings. But Jean, let's start off. Welcome to the session this afternoon. Just start off with an introduction as to who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's great to be with you. Of course, you're in the end of your day in the afternoon on the other side of the world, and here I am in Hawaii, and we don't even have the sun up yet. So it's lovely to be joining you first thing in my morning on the first day of November. I'm with a company called Business Consulting Resources. We were started by my husband and myself 42 years ago in Hawaii. And we created the company so that we could help families in business really achieve to their full potential. My background was growing up with a family business and in a family business. So that was the lifestyle that I knew. And it made total sense to me that I would go into business with my husband. I got my education here in Hawaii at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, studying communication and organizational development, both the focus of my undergraduate and my master's degree. And we really love what we do. We love helping families navigate what can be a very tricky landscape of a business system working in combination with a family system. And we are also working now in the California market. Particularly focused in Northern and Southern California, and enjoying working with a lot of families in that market as well, and learning a lot based on the differences in the two markets, the Hawaii market and the California market. Quite intriguing to compare how families evolve in both of those parts of the world. And Paul, if I may, let Celine Casamina, who works with us at BCR, do a quick introduction of herself and her background. That would be great.
Yes, Celine, welcome to the session this afternoon. Tell us a bit about how you've got involved.
Sure. Thank you, Paul, and thanks, Jean. Today, I am honored to be your slide master, so I'll be supporting Jean in the presentation in that very important role. I am one of our consultants at Business Consulting Resources, usually based out of our Honolulu office, but I'm actually calling in from Ontario today, so we have several different time zones on this call already. I am from a family business myself, as many of our consultants are. So my parents started a mortgage company together 30 years ago. We've had many family members in the business throughout the years, with now the second generation coming in. But I am actually a family business consultant who supports other family businesses through their succession and strategy goals. And I started working with Jean on our family business research a few years ago, and together we have gotten very deep into this new focal point, which Jean will be getting into, which is women leaders in family enterprises. So we started doing research back in 2017 on general family business matters to really better understand our audience base and understand the landscape that we were working in at a deeper level. And I've had the privilege of being a part of that research group, which Jean will share more about today.
Fantastic. Well, it's good to have you on the call, Celine, and I look forward to your contribution too. So Jean, what was the fundamental, where did the research start, and why women leaders in family enterprises?
Yeah, it started, as Celine said, when we were really digging into the whole notion of understanding some of the why and how, through a research lens, family businesses operate. And we started looking at succession, and we looked at why founders have such a difficult time letting go. And we looked at some of the barriers that got in the way of rising gens really coming into their own leadership capacities within their family enterprises. And right around the time of the Me Too movement, I think everybody remembers that, when things were exploding in the United States in particular, about the way women were being treated in various industries, we said, this is a unique situation and a unique moment in time, and we really need to look at what is occurring in the family business ecosystem for women. how are they being treated by their families, by their vendors, by their communities, by their employees who are non-family members? Are they experiencing some of the same sorts of things that we're reading about that the Me Too movement was prompting? And so that's why we started to dig into this. And as you can see from the slide, if you'll go back for a moment, Celine, women are 50% of the US workforce, and yet we're still extremely underrepresented in leadership positions in family businesses and not in family businesses. And this is terrible, but 4 in 10 women experienced gender discrimination at work in 2017. And we just took the presumption that that's not okay. Furthermore, when we started to dive into the research, we said, well, maybe families are above all this mess. Maybe because we thought blood is thicker than water. Maybe families know how to navigate around these suppressing behaviors with respect to women. So that's kind of what we went into this. And we really wanted to dig deep and understand from a first person perspective, from talking to women, what really was their experience in the family business.
Fantastic. And I'm assuming that process took a while. You collected the responses, not just from the US, but the UK and elsewhere.
Yes, we really took a big deep breath and said, well, let's blow this up, because the very first time we delved into this topic was in 2019. And we said, well, let's do a small thing. Let's look at the differences between Hawaii and California, since we are active in both of those markets. And that effort was largely qualitative, largely interviews coupled with a focus group. And we did the focus, and you can see the timeline of 2022 when we released everything. The focus group was really what pushed us to say, you know what, we need to blow this up into a bigger way. And the focus group was pretty moving for Celine and me. We assembled a group of women in our office conference room in Hawaii. So we had local folks in Hawaii, our home office is in Hawaii, and we had women in California who zoomed into that conversation. Many of these women had only known each other by name. They didn't, really know each other, but the Hawaii group in any case. And the California group and the Hawaii group had no clue who these people were. And we opened the focus group discussion with these questions around what is their true life experience around bias and discriminatory practices, and what's really happening to them. And Paul, the connection that these women made was so electric and so instantaneous. The common denominators that they all felt and they all experienced were too many to count. And it was horrible. Celine, I'm going to let you chime in a moment, because I know you were really impacted by that as well. It left us feeling the sense of we have to do something. We have to learn more about this, and we have to discover, is this a bigger challenge on a bigger level in the community of family businesses, no geographic boundaries. So that's really why we took the next step to do a little bit more in 2021, and then the bigger step that we just did, where we collected 141 studies with 101 of them being good, as they say in the research community, complete and usable. And 39 of the responses were from the UK and 58 were from the US. The rest were spread across the geography. Celine, if you want to add a couple comments.
Yeah, thanks, Jean. I think a major takeaway from our initial years of research for me and Jean was how unique this experience was, and what a niche it was to be a woman in a family business. Many of the younger women that we spoke with in this focus group were a part of other leadership cohorts, right? So some of the bigger names of leadership development groups and networking groups, but what they were able to share within the setting of other women in family business touched such a unique space in their lives that I didn't think they really had a platform to share with others. I mean, we're talking very sticky subjects like what happens when you go through a divorce and you're in a family business? How does that change the dynamic?
Right.
How are my parents looking at me as the future leader of this company, but also, you know, analyzing how I am as a mother to their grandchildren, right? Very, very sensitive topics that were unique to this experience. And so that's one of the drivers for why Jean and I knew we had to look into this, and that there wasn't really a huge body of research out there about this very specific experience.
Fantastic. So we can see it touched you, and it's driven the agenda, I guess, for the ongoing discussions and the evolution of the project. Talk to me a little bit more, Jean, in terms of how that motivated you then to take the next stage and to try and collate some general feelings of themes that you could take forward, and where then what led to the actual things that you did actually take into the survey this year.
Yeah, well, what we came away with in 2019 were some of these findings, I think, that 19 and 20 that really caused us to say we have to dig deeper, particularly to look a little bit deeper at bias and imposter syndrome, because that was a recurring theme that we kept hearing about and learning more about in 19 and 20. And really what women were telling us at that time is that we're still having to deal with a world that was created, for all due respect, middle-aged men, and that even the family business ecosystem was still designed with that gender in mind. The imposter syndrome was showing up very much so in 2019 and 2020, in that women were always looking for approval, women in their family businesses looking for approval, looking to be overqualified, looking to prove themselves, looking to be more competent than anybody else in the room. And the imposter syndrome was being fueled so much so by people, vendors, clients, non-family employees, feeling that these women came into the opportunities that they did simply because they were a family member, not because they really had the capacity and the skill and the capability and the education. And then even more importantly, the voice of women at the table was very much silenced, even in the family business setting. If her brother said it, her parents were much more likely to accept it than if she said it. So that, that led us to really dig into the hypotheses of how is the experience of bias and discrimination in a family business setting really impacting women in family business with respect to their perceived competency, their work performance, and their career progression. And we also wanted to look at how is the experience of bias affecting their feelings and affecting how they think about imposter syndrome for themselves, let alone how others may be imposing that imposter syndrome feeling on them. So that's what pushed it out.
Okay, and I guess that's the important thing, isn't it? Because it doesn't matter what we think, it's how the individual in a position within the family business themselves is receiving and hearing what's being said and how it affects their mental health and mental well-being, but also their day-to-day operational performance. So you had a good general understanding of what you were looking to do, and we can see the hypotheses and goals as you've just outlined them on the screen there. So that was the basis of the way you started, and then you took the jump. And
yeah. We took the jump, and it was so scary because, we just went back and forth with the study and the language of it. And are we asking the right questions? And how is this going to be perceived? And we were so fortunate to have the help of several collaborators in this effort. So our company, Business Consulting Resources, through women leaders in family enterprises. Obviously, we were a lead role in doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but we could not have done this without the guidance of the University of San Francisco and their Gellert Family Business Center, Loyola Marymount University and their Family Business Entrepreneurship Program. And we have several active advisors on our W Life Advisory Board who were very engaged in this effort with us as well. And so, I think it must have taken us probably 4 or 5 months to get the study itself right, to really be sensitive about how we were going to engage in this electronic dialogue with these women. And so everything was online, and that was the big difference in this past effort. And I have to say, I really missed the opportunity to talk to the women, and we're going to have to really think about that going forward. There's something amazing in having that conversation one-on-one and getting that real qualitative input. However, because we wanted to reach numbers so that we could hopefully have some statistical significance, we needed to choose the online version. The collection period was from February to June of this year. The experience we thought was pretty good, multiple choice, Likert scale, open-ended, and we did create an imposter syndrome assessment. So there were 7 questions, I believe, that were connected with that imposter syndrome assessment. And we had a scale, and if your numbers were low, your instance of experiencing imposter syndrome were low. As your numbers increased, your instance of experiencing imposter syndrome was quite a lot higher. Participants were women or people who identified with the feminine gender. We were very conscious of that. Could participate. They did have to be actively involved in the family business in some way, but they didn't have to actually work day to day in it. They could be a shareholder, family council, etc. And as I said earlier, we had 141 total responses, 101 complete, with an interesting balance of 58 and 39 between the US and the UK.
So fantastic. So the actual data that you've collected is statistically valid in terms of assessment. You've got more than 100 responses. So we can take some of the findings and actually use those in our own fields of work in terms of actually understanding a bit more about the role of women in family business and how they feel. So
yes,
I'm really excited to see some of the findings. So let's try and get into some of the findings. I think this is where the
dig into that. Okay. So here you can see some of the breakdown of where everybody was. And I will say we are statistically valid, and Celine's going to remind us of the points that are truly statistically valid. We had a help from a really phenomenal young woman, a PhD, who kept us true to, to really analyzing this for statistical validity. So that's the quick breakdown, and you can see where everybody else came from. Yeah, go ahead, Celine. Age range was interesting. You can see where the big bulk of it landed in the 40 to 49 arena, and followed by the 50 to 59 arena. And look at how educated we are, we women in family businesses. So many hold master's degrees, and many hold bachelor's degrees. So that was really cool to see. And I think that's interesting. And as I was reflecting on doing this with you all this morning, I kept thinking about, and you'll see this, that women in the UK seem to really have their acts together, to really be doing pretty cool things compared to women in the US. And I'm wondering if we can get some dialogue going with folks who are on this webinar about why we think that's so. And we'll see some of the details that support that comment in a moment.
It's also interesting looking at those numbers that 68% of the respondents were over the age of 40. So
yes,
they had a longer period of time in being involved in the family business to base their results on. So not only the results statistically correct and all valid, they're also based on women that have had a long experience of life in the family business too, which gives you even more credibility to what you've done.
Yes, and it's a very good observation, Paul. We were not dealing with women who just jumped into this fray a couple of years ago. They've been trudging at it for a long time. And this is the slide that definitely makes that very, very clear. As you can see, the 21%, 5 to 9 years, and then 19%, 10 to 14. But look at 30 plus years, 13% in their family businesses for 30 plus years. That's remarkable. Remarkable.
Once you start, it's in your blood, isn't it? You can't get away from it. Once you start and get involved and entrenched in the family, it's there forever.
Yeah, or I'm not being negative, but maybe you're so ingrained that you're just stuck in it in some ways. I can't see anything differently. Or on the positive side, I could never imagine myself doing anything but being involved in the family business,
Yeah,
and then the generations. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say you could take both sides, but I think the richness of the population of people involved will give us some good data to use going forward, irrespective of whether they feel they've been burdened by not being able to get out or they're still loving being involved. They're still very much heavily ensconced.
Yes, they are. That's absolutely true. And we were really happy to see that the bulk of the respondents were in Gen 2, and even happier to see the percentages that we were getting in Gen 3 and Gen 4. That was really encouraging. I mean, we expected a high percentage of founding gens to respond, and frankly kind of expected that we'd get a fair bit of Gen 2 respondents, but really delighted to see that Gen 3 and Gen 4 number. I mean, all of us here who are involved in family business, we know how hard it is to get to Gen 2, let alone Gen 3 and Gen 4.
No, totally. And again, you've got the balance in there. And I think it's actually better to have a longer standing, because they will have lived through a transition, hopefully seen a succession and a positive one to make it to Gen 3 and Gen 4. That they'll have different they can bring to add some more value to the study too. So yeah, I agree. It's great to see them being involved and having been involved to that length of time too.
Yes, and I can speak from personal experience of how challenging it is to go from founding Gen to Gen 2, because I'm living that right now.
Exactly, and I know you've been through a succession. You're going through succession too, so you're experiencing it as a woman leader in a family business too. So this must resonate with you very closely.
Big time, Paul. I mean, as I've said to everyone, the transition from my husband and myself to our son is the most difficult one I've ever been involved in, and I've been helping families transition for 42 years. So I really understand very, very deeply. I can empathize with these women extremely about the challenges of a succession.
Yeah, and you've been through it yourself, but as you say, you've been advising others on it for generations, and now seeing it firsthand. It must be a very different emotional experience.
It is, and emotion is the right word. It's so, I can see so clearly when I'm analyzing it for someone else and another family that we're a trusted advisor to, and yet I don't have that clarity of vision for myself. It's so difficult for me to take off my mother hat and really look at my son as partner. It's an interesting phenomenon.
They always say this, the same with bankers and financial accountants and things, isn't it? They're always harder to manage your own finances when it's the field that you're in. So yeah, I know you'll get there. You've got all the attributes, you've got the resources. You're being a mom.
Yeah, I know. And I will say I'm very grateful for the fact that we also have a wonderful consultant who's guiding us. So we are taking our own advice.
That's it. You should. I think it's always good to counsel others when you're going through a big change. And clearly that's the stage you're at as a business. So good to know you're taking your own advice there as well, Jean.
Thank you. All right, Celine.
So Celine, you have a good population, and you've asked some interesting questions around gender bias and the role of the women in the family businesses. Talk us through some of the slide on the screen here in terms of experiencing bias. Talk us through some of the responses you've got and what it means and some of the implications.
Sorry, did you say Celine or Jean?
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Celine. You take this one.
So this initial page, kind of set the tone for the rest of our findings. But what was very interesting was that it was split nearly down the middle as far as women who said that they experienced gender bias and those that said they did not. And this was just a straightforward question, was asking them to to identify this, and we'll show you the detail in a second. But yeah, it was essentially split down the middle, with 49% saying yes, they did experience gender bias in the workplace, and 50% saying no. When we first saw this number, it just opened up even more questions to us. I mean, some questions that came out were, you know, are we even recognizing what gender bias is? For example, earlier you were mentioning women who have been in the business for 30 plus years. You know, working as a woman in business in general 30 years ago is a very different landscape than what we have today. So many questions came out of this. It was interesting to see that nearly down the middle split. We did find this to be particularly interesting. 52% of our US respondents from the group that came from the US said that they did experience gender bias, whereas only 44% of our UK respondents acknowledge the same. So we are starting to see some differences between our US and our UK based respondents. And there's some interesting data that further supports that in our future slides. So those were some of our interesting takeaways, but we will be honest, this question opened up even more questions for our research group that we actually want to expand further. So it's right about down the middle.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. And did you find any difference in terms of the responses by age or length of time served in the family business, in terms of taking on board your point in terms of the role of a woman 30, 40 years ago would have been potentially, or the way the business operated 30, 40 years ago would have been very different to the business of today? And
that's actually really interesting. We did not slice and dice the data that way to look at how the different ages responded. But that's something that I think we'll add to our list of analysis. It's every year we gather research, it actually opens up even more avenues that we want to
questions.
Look at. So I think that's one that we'll take a closer look at, and would love to follow up with you, Paul, on what our wonderful analyst finds.
Yeah, that would be really interesting for me, I think, especially because the day that we live in operating now, it's much more open in terms of conversation, as Jean alluded to, the Me Too movement. People are prepared to voice their opinions a bit more. And I don't want to say that women today are more opinionated, but I just think women are maybe more aware and open to having a conversation. So I think that could be a really interesting dialogue to have later on.
Yes. Could I just pose a question to you, Paul? And I'd love your take on this. I was reflecting on this 52% of the US and 44% of the UK actually report feeling gender bias, and thinking that's fantastic that the number is quite a bit smaller. The percentage is quite a bit smaller in the UK. And I was reflecting on the traditions of the UK and the way women, I believe, sooner than the US, were able to come into positions of power in the UK. I mean, think about Mrs. Thatcher, and think about the monarchy. And I couldn't help but wondering if that is influencing the I call it better situation with respect to women in family business in the UK not experiencing gender bias as much. What would be your take on that, Paul?
That's a really good question. And the male sitting here, I'm not sure I'm necessarily going to be the best person to answer you, but I think, knowing the family business community here in the UK, I know an awful lot of senior positions and managing positions that are being undertaken by women. Female CEOs that are doing fantastic jobs, and females on boards and in senior positions. I don't know if it's got something to do with culture, the last 10, 15 years in particular. So again, it would be interesting to see what the age demographic was of the UK response. But the last 10, 15 years in particular, there's been a real respect for actually putting people into position based on ability and merit, and not necessarily, as tradition would have had, the eldest son taking the lead role all of the time. So those conversations have been a lot more open. So I don't know if that's influenced some of the roles that have been taken on. I think our university system, your statistics in terms of degree qualifications and senior professional qualifications, I think there's been pretty much a 50-50 split, or at least a mirrored male-female split of people going through the educational programs within families that have gone back into a business scenario afterwards. So maybe the education, maybe the social context, maybe a
Okay.
little bit more of the UK culture of
Yes.
actually, it's not uncommon for families in the UK to only have one or two children, maybe three.
Yes.
We don't
Yes.
have we don't tend to have maybe as large a family as some of the American families that I know of. So maybe the talent pool being picked for the family next generation coming through is smaller, so it gives more
Yes.
opportunity. But those would be my initial thoughts, that maybe it's cultural, maybe it's societal, but maybe it's based on the number of potential family members there are to step into those roles.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. Continuing areas for discovery for us for the future.
And it'll be interesting maybe to get some interviews around some of the people that have taken on different roles and how they move roles compared to the people that they were up against in terms of the selection points.
Yes. Yes.
And I know, I think attendees are able to chime in through the chat. Paul, we would love to hear thoughts from the audience on, their perspectives on Jean's question also.
Yeah, Celine, I think that's a good point. What we'll also do is we'll make the slides available and the recording available through the Family Business United platform afterwards. And I will encourage people to post follow-up questions, comments to the post online, and we'll share those with you. Anything we get in from that will help move the project forward, then we'll share those with you afterwards as well.
Fantastic.
That's perfect. And we'll see what we can do about getting a bit more granular on the age of the respondents. We can go back to our wonderful PhD statistician and see if she can do one more slice for us. It'd be great to see that.
So 50% of the people have experienced some sort of bias.
Yep.
What has the research told you in terms of how that bias has manifested itself and where's it come from?
Sure.
Yeah, Celine, you want to take a first start at that?
Sure.
Look at where it's coming from and how it shows up.
Yeah. We had a selection of options that our respondents could choose from, and you can see here at the bottom of the graph what those options were. Interestingly, a lot of the sources were external, so from others in their business ecosystems, the external business community. So we're looking at customers, vendors, the business community at large. And I will say, back in our 2019 and 2020 research, Jean and I heard these anecdotes from many women about the responses they were getting from their business partners, so the strategic partners of their family's business, from different vendors, from customers, saying things like, "You don't really know what you're talking about. Why don't I just talk to your dad?" And there were so many anecdotes like that. So we weren't all that surprised to see that the external business community was a large source for a lot of the women in this study. It was about even based off of our UK and our US respondents. Both groups selected that external business community as a source at the same rate. What was very interesting to me and Jean and our research group was the difference of our UK and US respondents who identified a source being internal. So experiencing gender bias from other family members within the family business, whether they were other operators in the family business, or they were on the corporate or advisory boards and were family members. With the UK, we had a 24% versus 43% in the US, which is a staggering difference. And that really caused us to question, what are the differences in the culture, society, the traditional gender roles?
Right.
So many of our initial interviews spoke to these traditional gender roles that were expected of them as women in the family business. I mean, some of them had told us that, their role in the family was to go get married and produce grandchildren. It was never to be a part of the business, right? It was just always set that the brother, the male cousin, was going to take a lead in the business. And we were seeing that in our Hawaii base, we were seeing that in our California base. So definitely across the US, there are still these very staunch traditional gender roles and expectations of what women are supposed to take on in terms of their domestic responsibilities, and not just within their nuclear family unit. So if it was a, a wife and mom, there were expectations across the board where, second gen women in family business were also expected to take care of their aging parents. And so there are all of these traditional gender roles. And we were wondering, would love to pose the question back to you, Paul, right? About what you think of that last point on the family members being a source of bias. And Jean, please chime in also.
Yeah, I want to add to that and again, we kept thinking about how is this difference so wide between the US and the UK? And how is it that in the US we're so plagued, women in the business are so plagued by suppression from our own family members, regardless of what role they're taking in the family business ecosystem. And I kept thinking about, well, I wonder if some of it is governance. I wonder if there's just a more open governance attitude that families in the UK embrace towards being gender blind, and to really looking at the individual and finding the best fit for the individual to the appropriate role in the family business. And to Celine's point about where family businesses in the US tend to target women, it is take care of the household, it is take care of the aging parents, it is produce grandchildren, and sometimes it is, okay, go deal with our nonprofit, go give away, go be philanthropic, but you're too delicate to deal with all these tough stuff going on in the business. So please, your thoughts, Paul, on why this distinction is so wide.
And I agree with you, it's a big distinction between the and the US market, totally. Again, I think it would be interesting to know what the age profile was with regards to the answer, because if there's a significant difference between the age profile of younger versus older women who maybe have just had a child or have been through something, and maybe the gender bias is more on their agenda than maybe not. So I'd like to understand maybe a little bit more about the splits and the nuances to see that, because it is a big difference.
It is.
I think the other thing would be maybe the route to market or the route into the job in the family business, whether there's more support in terms of merit and professionalism, and that the women in the UK have come in on merit and been recognised for the position they're doing based on merit, what they can do and how they can deliver what they can do in a leadership role, so that they're less likely to face that gender bias from family members. I think maybe there's an element of that maybe within the UK numbers. But it'd be interesting to see, and because there is a significant difference. But I have to say, nothing jumps to mind and says maybe it's because of this, but it would be useful to explore, because then we can obviously address some of those challenges going forward.
Right. And I think, as always with research, it just breeds more questions, and this is one of them that we definitely want to dig into.
I think it'll be really interesting to see what comes from that, Jean, as well.
Yeah, agreed. Okay. So continuing on with the notion of what is the impact of gender bias and imposter syndrome, and you'll note those 3 bullets at the bottom of the slide that are bold. Those 3 findings were particularly statistically significant, that we were able to suss out of this, that imposter syndrome is definitely a real thing. And it clearly does impact how women think about themselves, how they feel about how they show up at work. They're pushing themselves to somewhat near perfection, in terms of having to be overqualified, having to work harder, struggling rather to internalize their achievements, and believing that they are underserving given their positions, believing that they don't belong where they are, which is, what can I say? It's really sad to think about that we've created an environment, even within the family business, where women in a family business don't think they deserve the position they hold. So, and clearly the challenges of balancing family and work, that still in large part is a woman-owned challenge. The responsibility of the family, the household, the kids still everywhere is falling on a female. The other impacts that we see there, women clearly don't have the same advantages that males in their family business have, and there is a general suppression of confidence that imposter syndrome and gender bias will create for a woman in a family business ecosystem. Celine, did you want to add to that?
I will add a bit to the imposter syndrome. This actually is an area where we did do an additional layer of analysis as it relates to age. And Jean, you can expand on this one, but we did find that the older respondents appeared to have lower levels or ratings of imposter syndrome. And that in fact opened up even more questions for us as to, you know, what the cause was, but there seemed to be a correlation there. And, you know, who knows if that was a matter of having had the experience to finally, you know, achieve, I won't say no imposter syndrome, but to experience that less. I don't think we had anyone who indicated 0 instances of imposter syndrome, but that was an interesting tidbit.
That's for me, it's a really interesting comment. I think almost perception-wise, you'd expect if they have a degree of imposter syndrome, that the more they've developed their role, they've added their professional qualifications, their personal development, experienced life in a leadership role, managed or led a board, that you'd expect almost that level to go down with age. So again, it'll be really interesting to explore that. And it's interesting for me as well, talking to a lot of next gen, male and female, imposter syndrome is a massive topic that's probably underappreciated and under-recognized. The number of times you get families together in a conference or an event, and the light bulb moment is they suddenly realize that someone else feels the same way and they're not alone. And that actually striving to follow previous generations in a multi-generational business, there's always that element of am I doing as good as a job as my previous ancestors, and will I be able to leave the business in a better place than them, and all the pressures that come with that, and being a steward for future generations. So potentially a growing family with more family shareholders and responsibilities. So I think that imposter syndrome for me is both sexes experience it, but clearly it's come out as a significant thing in your population and the research, that it's something we should be addressing a little bit more in terms of giving everybody support so that they don't feel that way, and that they can reduce the element of feeling under pressure to perform to a level that they maybe weren't thinking of in the first place.
Yes, and anecdotally, I'd like to add the notion of the generations and imposter syndrome. In working with so many clients, in helping them go from founding Gen to Gen 2 or Gen 2 to Gen 3, but particularly founding to Gen 2, I see in the work that I do that many of the rising Gen males don't seem to have much challenge with imposter syndrome, just the opposite, that they often feel that they're ready before their founding gens feel they are ready, and they often want to assert their position and take control. And it does create strife between founding gens and the rising gen males. I don't see that as much in the rising gen females. However, I do still see the sense of readiness and confidence in a rising gen female than I see in a founding gen female. And that's an interesting thing that we'd like to dig more into as well. I think there's a generational shift, and I think these younger people are so talented. They've been able to have educational opportunities that those who came before them didn't have. Many of them have worked outside of the family business. You know, they've earned their ability to stand tall and be counted, if you will. And I think they're bringing that into the conversation. So I would hope that this instance of imposter syndrome, male or female experience, would continue to lessen as these young people build their voice and build their confidence and really understand who they are and what their capabilities are. And furthermore, understand how to appropriately communicate that to those who came before them, because there's the rub, right? I mean, you can have that feeling and yet not present it quite well to those who came before you and create the very, very unintended consequences that may cause more challenge than you really want to deal with.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, Jean. When you look at the statistics we heard earlier on this week from a leader in terms of the Gen Z, and the Gen Z population for the workforce will be over a third of the global workforce will be Gen Z by 2030. So you've got a much younger generation coming through that are academically achieving significant results. The perception that they flip from one thing to another couldn't be further from the truth, because they've demonstrated by academic achievement they can multitask, but they have to be taken on that journey too. And there's that level of how do we get them through that journey so it doesn't create those pinch points and create even more strife down the road.
Yeah. Cool.
It's challenging. I mean, balancing work and family for everybody, again, without making it gender specific, has always been a topic of conversation in the 20 odd years that I've been doing the work that I do, managing home life, work life balance. I think some of that's changing. I think maybe the pandemics help people understand that actually you don't need to be omnipresent in order to do your job. It means you don't always need to be in the office, but you can do it. So hopefully that might alleviate some of the challenges that your population are reporting in terms of that's causing some of the issues. And maybe some of the societal measures that are being implemented in terms of childcare and nursery care within the work environment, the openness to parental leave, male and female parental leave, will hopefully address some of those things too. But it will be interesting to explore that as time goes on.
Yes, it will. I think there's a societal shift too that needs to occur. I mean, I think we're still putting society defined roles on a male or a female with respect to family and household responsibilities that just don't work. I mean, it really comes down to that family unit deciding what's going to work for them, period.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to ask Jean is, do you think that with maybe more multi-generational family firms and some of the population where third and fourth generation women in their family business, do you think that as the governance structures evolve and the businesses become slightly more professionally run with the right boards and meritocracies and all those types of things that become more professional in the way that businesses run, do you think that would have an influence in terms of hopefully reducing the amount of gender bias and the influence on women that's obviously felt? Do you think that some of the structures that we're developing more and more will help or not?
Yeah, I think they have the potential to help tremendously, because I think they do start to look at merit and best fit based on skills and capabilities. I think the challenge is really going to be the generation in control accepting that. And we're dealing with a case right now where this happens to be a matriarch who's having a real struggle with trusting her daughter to run the family business. And so there's so many emotions, as you all know, wrapped up in this. However, I do think that the more we professionalize, the more we're able to create performance expectations, to have the vision for the company, to have the strategy for the family company, to match skill sets to needs of roles, to create a culture of open communication that happens with respect and care and compassion. Yes, I think we can move the meter. I really do. I have hope that we can move the meter.
Sorry, Paul, if I can chime in there. I agree with that notion, but I also challenge it a bit in that I think it has to be a more societal level shift, because if we look at the research that was done before our Women Leaders in Family Enterprises research about the experience of women in the workplace in general, many of those firms, like the Fortune 500 companies, they had the structure, they had the professionalism in place, they had the boards, they had all of the right structural elements in place. But it wasn't that women weren't meeting those expectations and getting those KPIs at the the set targets. It was really more of that societal expectation of where does a woman belong. And so, well, yes, I agree that as you continue to move throughout the generations, and we do tend to see an increase of structure as businesses are passed down through generations. I don't think it's enough. I think it has to be more of a cultural shift as well.
And I don't disagree with you, Celine, at all. And I think the work that you're doing with you're bringing the women together in the forums that you do and the peer groups and the research that you're doing gives them an opportunity to meet each other and to talk, to share experiences. And the more those experiences are talked about in front of the male counterparts too. So it's not just
Yes.
women about women and the challenges, but it has to be in an open
Yes.
forum, put it out there so that everyone listens. And once it's heard more than once, and then twice, and then the third or fourth time,
Yes.
it will start to be heard in boardrooms, and things will start to change within families, within family businesses. But it's
Right.
about giving people a chance to talk and share and air, so that they don't feel alone, and that they don't feel that actually they're the only person feeling the way they feel, and that the
Yes.
community feel. I think family firms are really collaborative and will share, and I hope that helps the momentum move forward as well, to discuss
Yes.
these findings and help make difference and make change and make things better for all
Yes.
concerned.
Yeah, I think so too.
So what could be done? What are some of the thoughts that have come through the research in terms of what could be done to help try and combat some of this gender bias and the way that it's being perceived and received
Right.
by female family members?
I think you
Yeah.
started it off really well, which is we have to have collaborative discussions about this, and that it can't just be
Yes.
insular discussions. In fact, the book that kind of kicked this all off, Jean is a huge reader, and she was reading a book, I think, on one of her trips back in 2019, and she picked up a book by Joanne Lippman, and it was called That's What She Said. I think the title has
I can't
actually
remember the
evolved.
full title. Yeah.
It's now, I think, what women and men need to know about working together.
To get
I think
essentially,
the first
yes.
iteration of that book was called That's What She Said. What women know and what men have to hear.
Learn from them.
So, you made a really good point about this conversation needing to expand. And we're glad to be a part of that conversation, but it definitely needs to expand. So I think that's one point. We came up with a few others with our research group, but it's a list I think we need help adding to. Jean, you want to kick us
Absolutely.
off?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly the need for change, right? You can't do unless you're aware of a need. So succession planning has got to be worked on and thought about from a just non-gender point of view. And I think that takes education. I think it takes educating the family and the team on what bias is and how we can fall into that trap without even knowing it. And I think we really need to be open about discussing what the imposter syndrome is and how we can make sure we're not creating more challenge for people who experience it, and that we're really helping them understand who they really are and just how wonderful they really are, and lifting people up in that way. Society and challenging traditional gender roles would be great if we could move that meter, so that we can evolve as a community of families and businesses and not have expectations around traditional gender roles, and not raise our children in traditional gender structures either. I think policies and practices have got to be fair, even down to evaluating and standardizing compensation, and close that gap. Why do we still have that gap? It makes no sense. Work is work, regardless of who's doing it. Certainly education is an ongoing opportunity, and there's so much out there. There are workshops, there's seminars, there's books, there's webinars, podcasts. I mean, for us to presume that we can't educate ourselves is silly. We can and we should. And you said it earlier, Paul, shared parental leave would be a great notion to start dealing with some societal changes. We still haven't figured that out in the US. Thinking about work differently. It's flexible. It's where you need to be when you need to be there. We don't have to chain anyone to an office any longer. We saw that, we knew that. And I think there's so much more opportunity to mentor. I don't think we do that too well in family businesses, but I do think we should look at that, these rising stars, and really mentor these family members in a way that will just set them up for massive success, so that these families who deserve to achieve legacy can and do.
I'd echo everything you just said there, Jean, to be honest. I think as a society, we need to celebrate success, whether it's male or female, irrespective of gender.
Indeed.
And celebrating the achievements of more individuals, male and female, then hopefully models will come to the fore and can explain how they felt. They will have been through some of this stuff themselves. The women that we all talk to will recognize some of the conversational pieces we've had today and have a view on how it's changing or not, or what can be done. And it's those conversations I think will start to move the benchmark forward. I don't think it's going to change overnight. I think it's a longer journey and a longer conversation.
No.
But I think you've got the start point there. The research is there. It proves the point. It proves there's an issue. For every single female person that's responded to your survey that said imposter syndrome is an issue and has been an issue for me, and or I've experienced gender bias, then proves that 50% of the people have suffered from these things. So they're real, they're tangible, and actually they shouldn't be. So as a society, we need to try and change and implement ways that we can move the bar forward. And we're delighted to be working with you, and we're delighted to support the campaign. The research is throwing out some really interesting questions, and I think the way forward is very much to explore those and do what we can to try and raise awareness, not just of the issue, but some of the people that are doing things, really good things, to try and move things forward too, and be part of that changing voice.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. And we're delighted to be collaborating with you and Family Business United, and just really appreciate the tremendous support that you've offered to us and the work that we're doing in this research. And we're very excited to continue it. And as we keep going on this journey, we'll be very happy to share what we learned with you, and you can share it with your family members who are engaged with Family Business United.
Definitely. And I should have asked before, is there a report coming to summarize this that we can then distribute down the line? Is there an actual report coming?
Yeah, Celine, could you address that?
Yes, absolutely. We do have our research summary. We would love to add the additional analysis to it based off of the suggestions on looking at the differences in age. But we do have a research summary. There is an article floating out right now on entrepreneur.com that I can send you that you can read, which is a very high level summary on our findings, but we also have the comprehensive summary that we'd be happy to share. So I will get that to you, Paul, and you can add that as a resource along with this PowerPoint.
And we'll add some commentary, and obviously going further down the line as things materialize and come to fore to take the conversation further, then we'll happily disseminate that too. Celine, Jean, it's been fascinating talking to you. I feel slightly like an imposter myself talking about female challenges in family business with two leading experts that have done so much research, but it's been enlightening, and I think it's really, really important that we continue the conversation. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for the research on behalf of the broader family business community. Keep doing what you're doing. It's a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for participating and listening.